Okay, hello everyone. Nice to meet you and good to see you. I'm Yael, a product manager in Sentinel data collection team. Today we're going to go through the intricacies of the Microsoft Sentinel data management. I have here Maria with me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria de Souza, and I am a product manager in Microsoft Sentinel and Unified SecOps platform.
So today we're going to explore the newly released features, auxiliary logs, and summary rules currently in public preview. We are also going to delve into flexible data management options, and we will present a live demo. We will also have time for questions and answers at the end. So feel free to post questions in the event. So before we begin, let's highlight why this topic is so relevant today. Security teams are increasingly overwhelmingly evolving threat landscape. Attacks are faster and more sophisticated, making end-to-end visibility more crucial. Many organizations, as we know, struggle with visibility across multi-platform and multi-cloud environments, and it's complicating their security efforts. Additionally, we know that scaling security data can lead to significant costs with the need for flexible data management solutions. So with this context in mind, we can see why Microsoft Sentinel is vital for modern security strategies, and we can dive into that. Maria can show us how different organizations have different needs for logs, right?
Exactly. So with this in mind, we recommend classifying security data into two categories, which we call the primary data, which you can think of as a hot tier, and the secondary data, which would be the warm or cold tier. So primary data are basically those logs that contain critical security value and are used for real-time monitoring. So you have detections and analytics running on them on top, so you can trigger alerts and incidents, or you can run hunting queries. Basically, you want to monitor these logs very closely. They're best monitored proactively because of the importance they have, and they enable security detections. Some examples of this would be EDR or antivirus logs, authentication logs, audit trails from cloud platforms, alerts from external systems that you want to ingest into your SIEM. And then, on the other hand, we have the secondary data. The secondary data would be high volume verbose logs, which contain limited security value, but they are very important still because in case of an incident or breach, they can help draw the full picture by adding the context that you need. By definition, they would not be frequently they would not be frequently used for deep analytics and alerts. They are accessed on demand instead, and you would do ad hoc queries on top of them. So some examples of this would be NetFlow logs, firewall logs, or proxy logs. And to explain how we can do it on Sentinel, yeah, I think you can show us different tiers.
Yes, so we talked about primary logs and secondary logs, but we can talk about understanding the different log tiers that we currently provide in Sentinel. It's crucial to understand the full picture. So today we have analytic logs, which are aimed for all of the primary logs, the security and activity logs. We are talking about the ingestion cost of $4.3 per gigabyte. It's important to say that this varies per commitment tier and course region, but that's the official price point. It has the retention for 90 days, and all of the features are supported at no extra cost. You have it available option for all the primary logs. And then you have the new auxiliary logs log tier that we will delve into details more later and talk in more about this new log tier. But it is aimed for high volume investigation logs, usually more low fidelity. And the ingestion price point here is 15 cents per GB. So you can see it's much more economical. You have it for 30 days interactive query. And then if you want to query the data, it has an extra cost of 5 cents per GB. So for example, querying 1 terabyte of data will cost $5 per day. And then you have the long-term retention, which is the non-interactive storage. You may have known it for archive. Used to be, that's a former name. You can send data to the long-term retention, both from analytic logs and auxiliary logs after the interactive period. And you pay 2 cents per gigabyte per month for the logs that are in long-term retention. You can save them there for up to 12 years. You can use search jobs, asynchronous queries to retrieve the data. And also here you have the scanned query cost of 5 cents, like in auxiliary logs. So let's get started with a bit more into the details of auxiliary logs and summary rules. So we are really excited to announce you the auxiliary logs, the new low-cost data tier, which is aimed for low-value verbose logs. It's a cost-effective solution for managing your logs. It is built for based on ADLS. It's a managed ADLS by Azure Monitor, and it is designed for efficient ingestion and storage for high-volume logs to give a solution for scale. It is aimed for less critical logs that can be used for investigation, limited queries, and to give additional context to enhance your total understanding. So we are talking about 15 cents per gigabyte economical price, available for 30 days, as we said, and can be sent through for up to 12 years. Additionally, it supports threat hunting by enabling you to query the data using summary rules, which Maria will talk in a minute. But you can aggregate those data from auxiliary logs to summary rules, so you can have the great balance of ROI to unlock the full value. You can access those logs and you can query those logs through the user interface, like you are querying any other logs. We will show this in the demo as well. But basically, if you are using the Sentinel portal in Azure, you can access it from logs. And if you are using the Sentinel portal, you can use it through advanced hunting and query the data and access them using KQL queries. Two things to keep in mind before we continue. Currently, we are not billing this feature. It is free of cost. Customers will be notified in advance when billing starts, but currently this feature is not built. And another thing to keep in mind that we are currently not supporting Microsoft data transformations and no standard streams in the current preview phase. So there are some implications regarding that requires a third-party tool like Logsearch or Cribble for parsing. We will talk a bit more about the implications of this later. To you, Maria, maybe you can show us how summary rules go and show the full picture.
Sure. So summary rules is a new feature that we introduced together with auxiliary logs. And while you can use summary rules with any tier, they are great in combination with auxiliary logs, and you will see why. So what are they? Summary rules, as the name says, are rules that summarize your data. As auxiliary logs has some limitations in terms of functionality, like for instance, you cannot create detections on top of auxiliary logs. What you can do instead is build a summarization logic to extract the most valuable aspects from your auxiliary log data, and then that would be stored in a summarized data set. The result from this summary rule, which is in the summarized data set, is stored in a custom log table in the analytic tier. This means you can use your summarized data set for anything you want, like to run analytics and create detections. So you can trigger alerts on this data, you can build workbooks, you can do hunting. So together with auxiliary logs, you can greatly optimize your costs by keeping the value of your data. So you pay less for ingestion, but you can get to use the data in a similar way as you were using it before, thanks to this feature. There are several use cases, and we will see this in more depth later, as well as a demo. But for now, I'll just give you some examples since we are still introducing this. Um, One use case would be IOC lookups. So auxiliary logs supports full KQL on one table scope. This means you cannot use unions or joins to join with other tables. However, you can use the lookup operator and perform a lookup on tables such as threat intelligence or, for example, a watch list if you're using them. And here the idea is that you would check if you have any matches between indicators of compromise coming from threat intelligence and IPs that came through your firewall. And if there is a match, which would happen not too frequently, hopefully, you would ingest this result into your summary data set, meaning that your summary data set would actually be very small and it would be very cheap because you have to be mindful that this data set is ingested into the analytic tier. So you have to summarize it. And then with this result, you can create a detection. So since you would have a match with threat intelligence, you would get a result for that. Then we have anomaly detection. So anomaly detection algorithms typically use historical data, and with that, they establish what a normal pattern is. And when you compare your real time data against these baselines, you can trigger alerts based on the deviations. And that way you can detect anomalies using summary rules. Another example that's a bit more specific are unusual traffic patterns. So by establishing rules based on typical network behavior, such as traffic volume or port usage, you can detect anomalies like unusual communication or port activity, which could indicate a potential security threat. And again, you could trigger an alert based on this. So what does the structure and the architecture look like? So here you can see we have a source and you can send it to the analytic tier on the left. That's the standard tier. It's probably what you're using today. And as we said, well, this provides full Microsoft Sentinel functionality, including detections, sending queries, workbooks, etc. And also summary rules, of course. After 90 days of interactive retention, this data would go to the long-term retention, which can be queried with non-interactive queries called search jobs. And you can store your data up to 12 years. On the other hand, you can also send the data to the auxiliary tier. And here, similarly to the analytic tier, once the interactive retention expires, this would go to the long-term retention. But the difference here is that you get 30 days. So what can you do with the auxiliary tier? As we said, you can create summary rules, and you see the arrow goes for the summarized data set, goes to the analytic tier, meaning that data is now in the analytic tier and has full functionality. For summary rules, you have to keep in mind we have the cost of scanned data, plus the ingestion cost of the results into the analytic tier. You can also run workbooks on auxiliary logs to visualize your data. But again, here you have to be mindful of the cost of scanned data, because in a workbook, if you add many queries, those would run automatically. You have to take that into account. Plus, of course, the performance of the auxiliary tier is expected to be slower because the auxiliary logs are based on ADLS, as Yael mentioned earlier. So you have to be mindful of the performance. And finally, of course, you can run interactive queries from the log screen, either on Microsoft Sentinel, on Log Analytics, or on the unified portal on Microsoft Defender once you have onboarded Microsoft Sentinel there. And now, yeah, let's look at an example with real numbers, I would say.
Yeah, so let's look at an example. So here we're looking at example of firewall logs. We hear from many customers that this is usually a very good use case for auxiliary logs, which is low value verbose firewall logs. So let's take an example. We consider a scenario that a customer has 1 terabyte of firewall logs per day. So if you would send all of those logs to the analytic tier, let's say in USX East, it will cost him with the commitment tier $2.48 per GB. And the total ingestion cost per month will be $7,400. And now let's see the numbers if they will send the same logs, firewall logs, to auxiliary logs. So the ingestion price would be 15 cents. And for 1 terabyte of logs, the total cost per month will be $4,500. And then we have the summary scan that we talked about there. You want to send all of the data to auxiliary logs and then summarize all of the relevant data that you need. So here we're talking about $150 summary scan for the summary scan. And then you have also the summary rule output, the ingestion into log analytics. So the output of those summary rules will go into the analytic tier, and it will cost $7,440, and the total cost for all of that, combining the summary rule and analytic logs, will be $12,090. So the total increased saving is 84% by sending the low value logs into analytic logs versus to auxiliary logs versus analytic logs. So you can see it's a substantial amount of money. We need to say that this really differs on the query that you write. So here we took 10% of the data that you're sending, the summary ratio. If you will write a different query, those numbers will vary, but that's just to give a general example. Okay, so now let's go a bit more into the details. So about how to start ingesting the data. You want to start using auxiliary logs, and you want to start ingesting the data. So at first you need to create a few resources. You need to create, and just to say, I know that we are planning to have also a data connector that will help you do all of that part, but I want to show you how this looks like today if you want to start using it today and start ingesting the data on your own. So you need to create the standard Azure resources. You need to create a custom table via API. It is important to say that dynamic field type is not supported at the moment. It's important to know that the field name of the columns must match the JSON payload, and the time generated is not mandatory, but if it's omitted, it will be just ingestion time. So that is something that's worth mentioning. After you're creating the custom log table, you need to create Microsoft Entra app registration to authenticate against the API. And then you create a DCR, data collection rule, that is limited to a single table without KQL transformations, no transformations at the moment. I can say that we are planning to have transformations when we release to GA, but I don't have a date yet that I can share. So after you have all those resources, you need to send the data. Here I'm going to talk a bit about the implications of transformation, of the lack of transformations, just want you to have all the tools that you need today. So if you use AMA to send the logs as custom logs, you will have two columns. You will have the time generated and raw data. And you can also use third-party tools to pre-parse the data. You can use Scribble or Logstash. Some vendors may allow sending the data via API, for example, Zscaler. So you could use those tools as well. Okay, so let's align a bit the data management needs to all those options to meet your business needs, because we talked about a few use cases and we want to talk about what fits where. So primary data should be directed to analytic logs. For secondary data placement, it really depends on your use case. If your use case is compliance, you can use auxiliary logs and the data should land there. If you have SOC scenarios, SOC analysis scenarios, and you need detections via summary rules, and you currently have Logstash or Cribble, or you want to use an Azure function, you can still use auxiliary logs. Otherwise, until we have transformations, you can use analytic logs, and once we will have transformation, that would be also the answer. If you have frequent and massive machine learning tasks or jobs that you need to do, and you need to do frequent long-term retention, ADX Azure Data Explorer might be still the valuable option for you. And Maria will talk a bit about a bit more about ADX as an option, because we know that many of you have been asking about this.
So I can talk a bit now about the comparison. I think we have compared analytics and auxiliary logs a lot so far. So you already understand the main differences. Now, how does it compare to ADX? In terms of cost, and I'm not going to cover the whole slide because there's a lot of text here, but you will be able to access it later for your reference. But regarding cost, I would like to say auxiliary logs is, of course, very cheap compared to the analytic tier. When we compare it to ADX, it's trickier because we have to keep in mind that auxiliary logs is a SaaS solution. You don't need to worry about the management of this data. It's managed for you. On ADX, on the other hand, you are managing a pass. So this means you have to define what your cluster will be, and the size, the compute, and the storage resources that you decide to go for will determine the price. So there isn't such a thing as like price per GB. That would be hard to estimate. As I said, estimations are complex and highly dependent on the customer requirement and architecture. Other cost components that need to be taken into account might be event hubs. If you are sending the data to ADX, as you need a pipeline to send the data. So just bear in mind that we have these aspects to take into consideration. In terms of supported table types, as we said, for auxiliary logs, we support DCR-based custom tables, and Microsoft standard streams are not supported at the moment, like Common Security Log or syslog, and KQL transformations are not supported yet. For ADX, as it's a PaaS, you have the flexibility to create the tables, table mappings, etc. Of course, one of the things that you need to keep in mind with ADX is the management overhead, which is important. You need a team to take care of that. Auxiliary logs compared to ADX in terms of use cases, we say auxiliary logs is great for high volume, low fidelity logs that you can use in investigations, and where you have summarized data sets through summary rules. So this should give you enough flexibility for use cases such as adding context to your detections or performing hunting, visualizing workbooks, etc. Now, if you have a team that's working on ML models, so a data analytics team that also requires frequent querying and heavy usage of that data, then auxiliary logs may not be enough for them because of all the limitations we mentioned. So in that case, ADX would probably still be the answer. And now I would also like to focus a little bit on the data retention options because, well, data retention is also part of log tiering, and we mentioned it briefly earlier, but let us also clarify what data retention options we have in Microsoft Sentinel today. So on the one hand, you have the interactive retention. Interactive retention, as we said, is 90 days for the analytic tier for free. But you can increase it up to 2 years at an extra cost. This is, of course, the most expensive option. It's only recommended if you really need to have this data available in this tier. Otherwise, we recommend choosing a different option because that would be too expensive. For auxiliary, it's 30 days, and you cannot modify that. There is no way to increase interactive retention. The experience of this interactive retention is SaaS, so it doesn't require any management overhead. You can easily set up the retention of your tables in different ways from the UI or using the API. And for the interactive retention, you have built-in experiences, interactive queries, so you can run workbooks, as we said, you can perform hunting queries, and there is no extra cost for the queries. Then we have the non-interactive long-term retention, which was formerly known as archive, and this goes up to 12 years. Again, it's SaaS, no management overhead, also very easy to set up. As we said, you just change the retention at table level through UI or API. The access to the data is less flexible, of course, than the interactive retention. It requires search jobs, and there are two cost components, I would say. So we have the cost itself for the retention, which is 2 cents per gigabyte per month. And then we have the cost for the search job. So the search job, there are two aspects here. One is the scan data, which is the same as the price we have for auxiliary logs, which is 0.005 per gigabyte that you scan. And then the results of your search job are ingested into a search table or underscore SRC, which is also in the analytic tier, similar to the summarized data set, as we said. And this table you can access and you can perform all the queries you want. So those are the two native options we have on Microsoft Sentinel. There is, of course, the option to send the data to Azure Data Explorer, and the way you would do this is through data export rules. Once you set up your data export rule, the data is sent from the log analytics ingestion pipeline to ADX, and you need an event hub in the middle. So again, you need to take that into account as a cost factor. And the other things that are important to mention is that this option is very flexible. You can, of course, access the data for as long as it's available on ADX, which you can define with flexibility. As we said, it's a PaaS. It needs maintenance on provision scale, and you will need to size appropriately to add performance. So it can be slow or fast depending on how you set it up. And this option is only available for the analytic tier at the moment, as data export is not available for auxiliary logs. So you cannot export auxiliary logs to an event hub. So you would keep it on the non-interactive long-term retention. And with that, I think we're ready to go into some use cases for summary rules. So I'll let Yael take it.
Yeah, sure. So we can explore some of the use cases for summary rules together with auxiliary logs. We can explore the first use case that Maria talked about earlier, which is lookup against threat intelligence or watch lists. So in this scenario, we focus on detecting and responding to indicator of compromise, IOCs, by running a summary rule, and that way we can effectively hunt across logs and quickly identify potential threats or compromise. So you can see the KQL query that we posted below. You can see that we create a common security log _CL. This is an auxiliary log table. You will see it soon also in the demo, this specific table. But you can query the data. You're extending all the data that you need and parsing them, and then using the inner lookup to the threat intelligence indicator, you can see where there are some threat intelligence indicator of compromise that happened, and you can do the lookup against active threat intelligence indicator to identify any matches with our source address. So this allows us to cross-reference our data with known threats. And then you can also, project all the relevant data that you need, the device vendor, device product, source malicious IP, all the data that you need, and those results will be sent to analytic logs. You can create alerts on top of that, and you can have all that data available to you. Maria, I want to go over another use case.
Sure. So another one would be an anomaly or a deviation. This one is based on an article that we have on the tech community on our blog post, and it was written by our colleague Ashwin Patil. We took it and we adapted it for the case you want to use it with an auxiliary table like common security log _ CL. This you will also see later in the demo. Basically, here we are looking at the logs that come through our firewall, and we want to define first what is a private IP, because we want to check events with public IP addresses and summarize the outbound sent bytes. So we will exclude the private IPs. As I said, that we'll show it in a couple of minutes. And another example would be trends. So in this case, we're not thinking so much about anomalies, but just trends as information for your team to see certain aspects. Like, for example, the query below gets a list of the apps and service principals that called the user's endpoint in the Microsoft Graph API. So in this example, we are not using an auxiliary table, because Microsoft Graph API activity logs are logs that are in the analytic tier, and for now you cannot send them to auxiliary. But this is just an example, because as we mentioned, summary rules are not restricted to auxiliary. So that's another thing you could do. Just by using the trends, you can then build workbooks, or workbooks would give you the flexibility to have the visualization of the data. But it's also important to mention when not to use summary rules, right, Yael?
Yes. So before you are creating a summarization, you can ask yourself if you can achieve the same goal with ingestion time transformations that can help you filter out the data that you don't necessarily need. So if, for example, you're using storage blob logs and you only need the authentication type that is anonymous, you could use DCR and filter out that data and send that to a specific destination. You wouldn't need a summary rule to achieve that, and that would be the way that we would recommend achieving this. Okay, let's go to the fun demo part. Okay, so here you can see we are in Microsoft Defender in the advanced hunting blade, and we are in the query section. You can see we are searching for that table. We here are in the common security logs. You can see with the color to indicate it's an auxiliary tier, and you can see also the reference that it is an auxiliary log table. You can preview the results, and here you can just I'm creating common security logs, summarizing, counting the data for the last 30 days. So interactive query, exactly like any other log tier, what you're familiar with in the analytic tier. It might take a bit longer because we mentioned it's ADLS and it's the last 30 days, but you can see here all of the results. You can also write here any other query that you like. Next week, Maria will show you how you use these logs with summary rules.
Yeah. So from from Microsoft Sentinel on the Azure portal, you'll find summary rules under configuration, or if you're using the unified experience, you will have it also here. So you can go to summary rules, create your summary rule. You'll have to give it a name. Description is optional. And then you'll be able to select either an existing custom log table, or you can create a new one. If you create a new one, it will be created for you based on the columns you decide to project in your summary rule, which is super convenient. We recommend enabling diagnostic settings. You can do it below. You only have to do it once. It will apply to your summary rules, to all of them. This will store information about your runs, and if there's any failure, you'll see later how you can track it. Next, you will define your summary query. So this is the use case I mentioned earlier. We are defining what the private IP would look like because we want to exclude those. And we're, in our firewall logs, we are looking for activity that equals traffic. We are projecting some fields that we need, like destination address and source address and sent bytes. And then we are excluding the IP addresses. We only, the private IP addresses. We only want to know how much traffic was sent to public IP addresses so that we can establish our baseline. And if there is a deviation, this could mean data exfiltration. So that's the goal of this summarization. We recommend using summarize. You'll see that if you remove it from your query, you will get a disclaimer saying summarize is missing. This is very important because your summary, as we said, is going to be ingested into the analytic tier, and you want to make sure that your results are not too verbose, otherwise it could get expensive. We recommend using the result simulation just to make sure that what you're summarizing is what you expect. So in this case, we only get one column. We can run this once per day, so that we would get one row per day, basically. You can select whether you want to run it every 20 minutes or every 24 hours. Again, in this case, it might be better to use the 24-hour because of the nature of the summarization. You can define the delay in minutes to adjust to your ingestion delay. So you also have that option. And then you can define when you want to start running your summary rule. You can do it automatically, or you can define the hour like on the dot. Here you see we have a validation error because we picked a time in the past. So once you pick a time, right time, then it should work, and then you can just save your summary rule. Once it's saved, first it shows up as disabled. It takes a few seconds, and then it will be automatically enabled, and it will start running based on your configuration. Now we can have a look at an existing one. You can click on View Runs History to see the history. You have filters at the top. You can see this succeeded. And then you can view the results in the logs by clicking on that link. And so here is our query that's checking specifically for the data that was ingested through this rule name and the start time that we selected in the history of summary rules. And then we can run it, and then we can see our data, which we can use for any purpose. And then, as I mentioned, you have the diagnostic settings. If you enable them, in the LA summary logs table, you will get the history of your runs. So here I'm summarizing count by status. So you see the status that we have. We have either started, succeeded. So you see they all started and they all succeeded. But we also have failed. I don't have any examples here, but you could create either a detection on Sentinel or an Azure Monitor alert so that if a summary rule fails, you get notified either with an alert or, depending on if you want to create an incident or an Azure Monitor alert. So that's the demo. And
yeah, I think you have here also a lot of resources that you can use, a lot of documentations with use cases, some of them that we shared in blog posts, and we plan to announce a few more. So stay tuned. I think this is a good time for a few Q&A, right?
Hi, great job, Maria. Yeah, thanks a lot and a lot of useful details. Um, Grading is not a lot of questions, which means that you have done a great job. Um, One of the questions that we got is, do we are supporting tables like common security log, syslog to send the data? What is the plan about it, if we have any? And also, can we utilize some of our Microsoft tools like Azure Monitor Agent to ingest data inside of auxiliary log table?
Yeah. So Maria, you want me to? I can take this.
Yeah, sure.
So for the standard table, so once we'll have transformations, we could use Microsoft standard streams. It is important to take in mind that it might be the same table like common security log, but it might the same. When I'm saying the same, it will be the same format, the same schema, the same table, and all of that. But we need to remember that sending logs to is that some of the logs will be in a plan which is auxiliary and some of them will be analytics. We have complications here. So we need to see it could be a different common security log that is designed for auxiliary logs. It would be a replica, but it won't be the same. Thinking of a scenario where you query the data and some of the data is stored in ADLS and some of them it's in log analytics. You can understand probably the complications here. But yes, we plan to have transformations to have similar experience as in analytic logs. And for AMA, for Azure Monitor, so once we'll have it, it is supported today for custom files, but it, as we said, it's only timestamp and message because you cannot parse the data at the moment. But it is in the roadmap to have transformations, and then you could use Azure Monitor agent.
Okay, thank you. And one of the questions that pop up two times is the basic logs with auxiliary logs. What we would recommend always to use and why, maybe also from your perspective.
Shall I take it?
Yeah.
Well, basic logs is still available today, but the challenge with basic logs is cost. So basic logs, opposed to auxiliary logs, is also a lower cost tier if we compare it to the analytic tier, but it's based on log analytics. It's not based on ADLS. We can make auxiliary logs so cheap because of the ADLS infrastructure that's behind it. So you can use basic logs, as I said, and actually there are standard tables today that you can see in the documentation, which you can easily switch to basic. Now the question is whether given the price that you're going to pay and given the limited functionality, because the functionality of basic logs is very similar to auxiliary logs in terms of you cannot run detections on it, you cannot do hunting queries, so you can use summary rules just like auxiliary logs. You also have the scan query cost like auxiliary logs. You can run workbooks too, like in auxiliary logs. So given the limitations in terms of functionality, we believe that the cost is not attractive enough, and therefore that's why we wanted to offer auxiliary logs for our customers to provide a realistic tier for those low value or secondary data logs. So to answer your question, it's available, you can use it, but yeah, I think it's worth doing the math before enabling it. And maybe it's worth waiting for auxiliary logs to support the full functional, well, the full transformations functionality that we need to support to get there.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Question on summary rules. Do we plan to expand support for summary rules to ADX, for example?
So that's a good question. So there are some efforts on cross workspace and cross query. I cannot guarantee you if we will support it through ADX. One of the advantages when we are creating a summary rule and we are, offering you that every 5 minutes it will run and the results we will run, we actually support the scale and we know it's provisioned and we know that it will work when we support it. And when we're talking about doing it over ADX, we need to make sure that what we are doing, the rules that we're creating, will work. So that's why we are not super hesitant to edit over ADX. But yeah, so that's a vague answer, but that's a vague and honest answer.
Yeah, and I will suggest to everybody who are interested in more about everything that we are working on to join our private preview community on AKMS/join CCP, because there is where we can share a bit more about our efforts, about future plans, and what we will be adding. Also, one of the questions that popped in is just second. Yeah, this is the one. What considerations we should have if we are moving now, like I already ingesting something inside of analytic log table, it's custom log that I'm ingesting. Now I want to switch that to auxiliary logs table. Is there any considerations that I need to take, or I just need to go inside of the tables management, select the table and switch it to aux logs, or there is something else that I need to do?
Yes, so you want Maria to take this? Or?
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. So at the moment, you cannot convert an analytic table into auxiliary. So if you want to start ingesting logs into auxiliary, you need to create a table from scratch. So you can do it via API. We still don't have a UI for this, but in the documentation you have the details on how to do it. And you define the schema of your table, so you create it, and then you can start ingesting. You can have, as Yael said earlier, you can have a replica, right, of a standard table. So you can have common security log, which is our standard table for Ceph, where you may be ingesting some of your firewall logs. Maybe you start filtering out those that you want to send to auxiliary. And then you can create this replica, which would be common security log _CL with the same schema as our standard table, and there you would send whatever you want to the auxiliary tier.
Yeah, I can add to that we are working on a data connector that will ease that process, that will deploy all of those resources, and we will create the table for you. If you, like as Benji said, join the CCP program, you can test it out and give us feedback on that. We're planning to do the first one probably for common security log. And another thing that you need to consider before deciding on switching to auxiliary logs is whether you have any detections on top of the data, if you need it for real time. So that's another consideration before you make the decision if you want to do that. Maybe you can use summary rules and create on top of them those rules that would be enough for you, and then you can do major cost saving, but you need to see if that's a use case that is right for you.
Okay, thank you. And the last one that I see on the list is if we want to ingest the logs, and we are now making decision, but for me, the performance and the speed to get the data is the most important. Should I go with auxiliary logs, analytic logs? How to make that decision, maybe from your perspective?
If you want to have performance and you really need the data real time, we suggest going with the analytic logs.
Yep. Okay, thanks. So analytic logs is for performance, fast getting queries, creating detections on top of them, but everything that is maybe noisy, verbose, simple auxiliary logs, and then create maybe some summary rules to get what you need inside of analytic logs to get detections on top of it. Okay, amazing. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. And we can wrap up then. Thank you for your questions, and thank you also for doing amazing presentation.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for attending today.
Thank you for joining us. Thanks.